I'm Scott Brady with Expedition Portal and Overland Journal, and we're here in Cherry, Arizona, testing two new adventure motorcycles. This is the newest offering from Ducati, and we've also got the newest offering from Triumph, the 800XC. This Multistrada is obviously a street-biased dual sport, but we're going to test its limits away from the dirt gravel roads and into the more technical terrain and see what it'll do for us today. We know that the XC is a little more dirt biased with a 21-inch front wheel, but it's also got a lot of street biased tendencies. So let's see how that bike as well does in the more technical dirt. So one of the really big differences between these two motorcycles is the size of the front wheel. And if you look at the Ducati, which has a 17-inch front wheel, compared to the 800XC, which has a 21-inch front wheel, you can see that the height of a ledge or a rock that you could roll over, that lever point, is very different between the two motorcycles. The Ducati's about down here as far as the height of a rock or a ledge that you could pop over, whereas the Triumph is way up here. So you're gaining 4 to 5 inches of additional ability to climb over a ledge or a rock, and that makes a big difference on the trail. However, I will say though that the way that they've tuned this suspension with the Ducati, with the setting in Enduro, it actually rides more like a 1200 GSA. It felt more like a 19-inch front wheel to me. In fact, when I got off the bike, I had to confirm that it was in fact a 17-inch front wheel. I was really impressed with how compliant that suspension was and how well it did over the little ledges and impregnated rock that we came across on the trail. And obviously the reason why Ducati went with this size of a front wheel is for a road biased handling. So this tire and wheel package like this is going to turn in much faster. It's going to be much more responsive in the twisties, and then this is going to be a lot slower to respond in the twisties. But the advantages and the reason why this bike is set up this way is to perform in the dirt. And another significant difference between the two motorcycles is how it's set up to take an impact on the dirt or a drop on the dirt. The Triumph comes with a heavy-duty aluminum skid plate, and it also comes with these really nice crash bars that protect this engine. But one of the things I did find interesting and notable between the two motorcycles is that the Ducati is actually more comfortable to stand up in right out of the box, whereas the Triumph, the pegs are placed a little bit further back and a little bit higher, kind of more in a jockey position, or more in a sport bike position. So it's a little bit less comfortable to stand up on. So this bike would really require some additional rise in the handlebars, to be comfortable to ride standing up in all day. But really that protection underneath is important. But one thing that we did note was that the rear suspension, where it connects to the frame, is pretty vulnerable. It hangs down low. Now it's obviously a big hunk of aluminum down there, but if that was to crack, the ride would be over. Now when we look at the Ducati for performance in the dirt, one of the things that we're looking at is how well protected are the components of the motorcycle. And in this case we have an plastic evaporative canister right here that could easily take a hit from a rock thrown up by the front wheel, or if you were to drop it or even come up on a ledge, this could be impacted. Now I do understand that there are ways to remove that depending on your state, and that may be something an owner would want to consider. The other thing is that it does have an aluminum skid plate down low, so if you were to come over onto a ledge, it would actually protect the bottom of the bike. But if you were going to come into a ledge at the front suspension compresses into a rock, this whole exhaust system here could be damaged quite easily. But I'm sure that there are other skid plates that are available for this motorcycle. But the one area of concern that I have that's the most is this water pump here on the side where it feeds to the liquid cooling system. This is extremely exposed, and I do understand that some companies like Touratech and Altrider do make some skid plates for this component, and I would even consider bringing an extra housing along. This is very vulnerable, and it's something if you did lay the bike over, it could easily be cracked and damaged, and then your ride would be over. But one thing that's really important on this motorcycle that I think is worth noting is it's very comfortable to ride on the road, really good, aggressive riding position on the road. But surprisingly, when you get it into the dirt and you get up, standing up and onto the handlebars, it's actually pretty comfortable. It's even more comfortable than the Triumph. So I found that that was a nice addition with this motorcycle, that they set up the ergonomics in a way that it really works well standing up. But one downside that I did notice is that the overall kind of boot area down here in the pedal position is pretty cramped. I was actually hitting the center stand push-up position. I was hitting some parts of the engine down here. So if you have a larger foot, maybe all the Italians have really small feet, I'm not sure, but if you've got a size 12, 13, 14 foot, this is going to be a very cramped kind of position down here. But there's some things I'm sure you can do to adjust that. Overall, I found that it was a little cramped, but still usable. So we had a great ride today on the two motorcycles, obviously two very different bikes and two very different approaches to the same problem. The interesting thing about the Ducati is obviously it's highly tuned for the road. It's highly tuned for the twisties and the high-speed trips that you can do, touring trips that you can do on this motorcycle. But what I found most interesting is once you go into enduro mode, it really does change the personality of the bike. I found that on this moderate trail today, that it really took everything with ease. It was very composed, the suspension was very fluid, very compliant, lots of traction. I disabled the traction control and I disabled the ABS. One of the things that we did find though about the ABS on this bike is even though it was in the off position, we were not finding that the rear brake was fully disengaging. So it may be that that's just an issue with this particular bike, or maybe we weren't disabling it properly, but that's something that you would want to look into as a potential owner to make sure that when you're in off with ABS, you're in full off. And another thing too, obviously this has very street bias tires, has a very small diameter front wheel, but I was surprised how well it took the rocks and the ledges and the little jumps that I took the bike through today. Overall, this bike gets the thumbs up on the dirt, given that it's so street biased. So if you want something that can really tear up the twisties and then go out and do a moderate trail with ease, this is really your bike. Now with the Triumph 800 XC, this is their more dirt biased bike. In fact, this is the most dirt biased bike that Triumph produces. And what really makes it different from the other Triumph triples, like the 1050, the 1100, and the other 800, is that this has a 21-inch front wheel. And when you get into the dirt, that's a really important feature for a motorcycle to have. And it's also got a little bit lower gearing, it's got a little bit longer suspension travel, and it has a little bit more other dirt biased appointments. So one of the things that I notice on this bike is that it's actually really fun to ride on the road. But the long legs do take some getting used to. So it's like my KTM 950 that I had. When you're riding it fast in the twisties, you gotta load that front brake a little bit and get that suspension to set, or else it can really surprise you as it goes through the stroke. But yesterday when we took a ride out to Baghdad on these twisties, it was really, really fun, really enjoyable motor, very smooth motor. Wish it had a little bit more power, but I would say that it's very appropriate given the displacement. And one of the advantages that you get with an 800 is really good fuel economy. So if you can stay off the pipe with this bike, I'm getting high 60s mile per gallon with this motorcycle. Now in the dirt, I think that the first gear needs to be a little bit lower, and that could obviously be changed out easily with the sprocket, but I would like the first gear to be lower. I'm having to use a lot of clutch modulation at lower speeds to not overwhelm either the motor or the gearing that the bike has got. That's one of the things that the Ducati is able to do better, simply because the motor has so much more torque. It feels like in first gear you hardly have to use the clutch at all. And then at higher speeds, this 800 actually starts to come into its own. That 21-inch front wheel starts to deliver, the longer suspension starts to deliver, and that's the only time we found on this trail that it really starts to outperform the Ducati. Everything else, it's an even match. And obviously this bike is a lot less expensive. It's a easier point of entry. It gets a lot better fuel economy, and it does feel like you could take it to that next level in the dirt with some knobby tires. So overall, I think that this Triumph has been a joy to ride. I've ridden it every day for the last several weeks and really enjoyed it back and forth to work. I've enjoyed it on the dirt trail that we did today, higher speed dirt sections, and then even on the twisty asphalt. So overall, this bike is really a jack of all trades, but a master of none.